Joe, you have tackled something on Sports on Earth that seems to be a rather daunting task at first glance. You're calling it the BBWAA project, and it's something that I think was spurred, correct me if I'm wrong, by this last Hall of Fame ballot and all the discussion as to procedure and who gets to vote. Is that the right way to button it up?
I would say so. I mean, basically what I was trying to look at, when everybody talks about the Hall of Fame, they talk about the entire Hall of Fame, and there's so many different ways people can get elected to the Hall of Fame. There have been veterans committees and old-timers committees and Negro Leagues committees and so on. But the Hall of Fame most people really are referring to is the baseball writers, the BBWAA. And so what I wanted to do was just look at just their choices, which is less than half of the Hall of Fame are people that the baseball writers voted in. So I kind of wanted to look at just the baseball writers' choices and see what those standards are and see how different they are. Because, whenever we start talking about people who are in the Hall of Fame and that don't really fit with the rest of it and don't really belong, and the ones that people usually use to compare their favorite players to, most of those guys are not baseball writer choices. So I wanted to see what the standards were and said I'll start doing this, and it ended up being this ridiculous project that dragged me,
So what were your findings, Joe? What did you find out then?
Well, I found out a lot of things. The standards are very high. The baseball writer standards are very, very high. But there are some quirks throughout history. I mean, there's certain guys that the baseball writers voted in who don't necessarily seem to fit with the other standards. It seems like those are the guys that had the best stories, had the best, for some reason the writers liked them a lot. It's very, very interesting. And then probably the most interesting thing is that the baseball writers are really the ones that have voted in the relief pitchers. I mean, that was, to me, the most interesting finding. There's no relief pitcher that was voted in by the veterans. So all of them, and they all have very, low sort of career ratings because they didn't pitch a lot of innings. And so it's just, I found it was very, very interesting that there's some consistency with the baseball writers, but there's also some definite outliers.
So I guess what you found, and I've read your piece, is that there are almost two halls of fame, two separate buildings based on the different types of admissions that we've seen through the years. Expand on that a little bit.
Well, I think that there really are almost two different halls of fame. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of people. The baseball writers have never put in like an owner or an umpire or a manager. That's always falls under the guidance of the veterans committees. So that's part of the two different Hall of Fames. But there's also just the players are very, very different. I'll give you an example. Craig Biggio is a guy that I voted for the Hall of Fame, and I think a lot of people did. He got 70% of the vote. He'll get in next year, I would think. But if you compare Craig Biggio with second basemen throughout history, he's definitely better than most of the guys in the Hall of Fame. But when you compare him only to the baseball writers' choices, suddenly it's a very, very different look. And there have been so many great second basemen through the years, especially when you go way, way back to Hornsby and Frisch and those guys. But you throw in Joe Morgan or whatever, suddenly he doesn't look as good. And he doesn't look. And I think that's what makes him kind of a borderline guy. As a Hall of Famer, he's not a borderline guy at all. He is clearly better than most second basemen in the Hall of Fame. But he's not better than most second basemen chosen by the baseball writers.
So, let me jump in and clarify here for fans that maybe are tuning in late here. What we're looking at is, this is a list of second basemen voted in by the writers. It's Alomar, it's Sandberg, it's Morgan, etc. When you compare Biggio's numbers to this group, that was that last graphic we got. And I think what you were referring to earlier, the players put in by the Veterans Committee, it's, say, the Mazeroskis of the world that brings some of those numbers down. But
but all this war, plus, minus...
Well, but I mean, for just for the sake of math, though, if you compare Biggio just to those elected in by the writers, that's what you're referring to, Joe? Am I right about that?
It is what I refer to. And I use war as the reference only to try to just simple number that you can look at.
Joe, I'm just saying, he's got 3,000 hits. That's what the person like me, the lay person, is going to look at. They're sitting there going war and all that. How's that translate to Carew and Alomar and everybody else? So.
Well, Carew and Alomar had really high wars. I mean, war is just a reference. It doesn't look at one statistic. It adds a bunch of different things together and tries to look at the complete ball player, include speed, include power, include defense. And it's not a perfect number by any stretch of the imagination, but it's a clear number that you can can look at it. And basically, I wasn't using it to try to make it seem like I think WAR is like the end-all, be-all, because I don't. But really, because I just wanted a simple number to look at for each player.
Yeah,
and
real quick, though, I just want to clarify, just for Hall of Fame's sake, I think it was pretty simple with why you voted for him. 3,000 hits, the stolen bases, all that. And I think most people from a generation of myself, and not the new number generation, says, okay, I get it. That's all I was saying.
Well, no, I think that's fine, but I don't think 3,000 hits necessarily. I mean, Johnny Damon could get 3,000 hits. Johnny Damon's a very good player. I don't know that there are a lot of people who think Johnny Damon's a Hall of Famer. And if he gets 2,970 hits or 3,004 hits, I don't think it's much of a difference. I mean, he's the player, and I think you got to look at him in a larger sense.
Okay.
What about other players, Joe? If you use this kind of new filter and compare players that haven't gotten into those just voted in by the writers, how do some of the other players kind of flush out?
One guy that I think really, really does very, very well when you start comparing these kinds of things is Alan Trammell. And that's a guy that has not gotten a lot of support. He's a guy that a lot of people just kind of think of as, yeah, very good player, not a Hall of Famer. But if you compare him to the great shortstops of the history of the game, he really compares very, very well. And he's a guy, one of the other things that I found, and this has nothing to do with stats at all, so it's something we could talk about specifically. There are very, very few players in baseball history who did everything well. That is something that you find when you look at the Hall of Fame. There are guys who are great power hitters, guys who are great fielders, there are guys who have great speed. There are very, very few players in baseball history who have done everything well. Alan Trammell really was one of those guys, a guy who did everything very well. And those kinds of players, in some ways, even if they do it at the highest level, the Willie Mays level, everybody, of course, calls him as great as anybody who's ever played the game. Mm-hmm. But if you do it at the Alan Trammell level, you tend to be a little bit underrated because there's not one thing that really catches your eye about him.
I think at the end of the day, you're saying the writers are a little bit tougher than maybe even the Veterans Committee of allowing guys into the Hall of Fame. And the writers it seems like they're making pretty good choices. Am I right?
Well, I think the writers definitely are tougher. And, the writers have an advantage. The Veterans Committee, obviously, the only people they can vote on are guys that the writers didn't vote on. I mean, the writers get first crack at all the best players, so their standards are always going to be higher. But, yeah, the writers have, for the most part, shown pretty consistent choices. There are some guys in there that you kind of look at and go, well, that doesn't really fit with the rest of this group, and that's just kind of an interesting point to look at. Say, well, why did this guy get in when this guy didn't? Why did Jim Rice get in and Dwight Evans didn't? And they're very, very similar players and both great players, same time, same team, the whole thing.
Your Joe Paterno book, being made into a movie, and we understand that Al Pacino is being cast as Joe Pa himself. Is there any chance that you can have a role in this? I know you wrote the book. You're not going to write the screenplay, or maybe you are. If you do, can you get the line, "It was you, Fredo," into the Joe Paterno story?
Yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to any sort of Godfather lines we can get in. I'm really thinking just instead of making it even about Joe Paterno, just making it about the Godfather.
Cast Pacino in a movie about Joe Paterno doing Michael Corleone. Are you going to write the screenplay? I should ask you that.
I am not writing the screenplay, and I should just say that the movie is not nearly as far along as everybody seems to think it is, and to this point, I knew nothing about any of this. I literally got an email from a friend of mine saying, "Hey, I hear they're making a movie out of your book." So it's not quite as far along as people think.
Well, despite that, and despite what seems to be a lack of participation on your part, congratulations on writing a book. It's going to turn into a movie at some point. Joe Posnanski, SportsOnEarth.com. We always love talking to you.
Joe, I feel real bad. I feel like you feel like I jumped you.
No, I don't, Harold. Nothing but love.
You got the final blow in the round table. I know you're still holding it against us. Okay.
Of course.
SportsOnEarth.com is where you can read Joe's work as well as others. The website, SportsOnEarth.com, the online destination dedicated to great sports writing in all its forms, SportsOnEarth.com.